Singh ji, Mr. Vijay Mahajan, Mrs. Naina Lal Kidwai, ladies and gentlemen in the audience here and those listening virtually, it is my privilege to welcome you all to CSEP and to this book launch. This book has been in the bookstores for a few months, but as this is the first formal occasion for a discussion on its contents, I refer to this event as a launch.
Actually, I've seen you on television for 45 minutes this afternoon. That was a launch.
That was a virtual launch, sir. So we at CSEP are honored and privileged to have you, sir, today amidst all of us. As you all know, the book is titled Anchoring Change, 75 Years of Grassroots Interventions That Made a Difference. I do not think there's a person in India today who has been as extensively and intensively involved with change over the past 75 years as our honored guest today, Dr. Karan Singh ji. From the day we achieved our independence on August 15, 1947, Dr. Karan Singh ji has been at the helm of policy and the crossroads of political, economic, social, and cultural change in the country. He was Prince Regent of Jammu and Kashmir in 1949, the Sadar-e-Riyasat from 1952 to 1965, the first governor of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, amongst the most senior-most cabinet members in successive Congress-led governments, and our ambassador to the US. He has been at the forefront of philosophic, cultural, and religious dialogue through his books, lectures, and teachings. There is scarcely an issue that Dr. Karan Singh ji has not been involved with, directly and or indirectly. And it would be no exaggeration to say that there is no one alive today who has his breadth or depth of knowledge, experience, and sensitivity of what our country has passed through over the 7 decades. To have him here in CSEP, in the CSEP offices, to launch a book that focuses on 75 years of change is a signal honor for me personally as the co-editor of the book and professionally as chairman of CSEP. We are hugely grateful to you, sir. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm also extremely grateful to Mr. Vijay Mahajan and Mrs. Naina Lal Kidwai for agreeing to join us today as panelists. Vijay is the doyen of civic interventions. He is amongst a handful of leaders that have inspired volunteerism and impactful grassroots interventions in our country. Currently, Vijay is the CEO of the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation and the director of the Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Contemporary Studies. Vijay founded Pradhan, or Professional Assistance for Development Action, an NGO that by inducting professionals to work with other NGOs, raised the quality and impact of grassroots interventions. Vijay also conceptualized the microfinance group BASIC. Its BASIC's objective was to attract mainstream financial resources into the promotion of the livelihood for the poor and women on a sustainable basis. This initiative spawned innovative financing models for development. I'm proud to say that Vijay is one of the authors of this book. Naina Lal Kidwai is nationally and internationally known for her leadership in business and finance. She was the chairman of the HSBC Group in India and the president of FICCI, the Federation of Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She has been repeatedly ranked in the Fortune magazine as amongst the most influential businesswomen in the world. But the reason I'm grateful to Naina for accepting our invitation has less to do with these distinctions than by the fact that this gives us an opportunity to tap into her experience in the civic space. Naina founded the India Sanitation Coalition and is author of the book Survive or Sink, an action agenda for sanitation, water, pollution, and green finance. Through this book, Naina has issued a clarion call to citizens, industry, civil society, media, and the government to collaborate to address the challenge of poor sanitation, water, and pollution in our country. Naina's contribution in this space has shifted the needle. She has made a big difference. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Naina. We at CSEP and I personally owe you both a debt of gratitude. Let me now share a few thoughts about the book. The idea of this book came to me as I circled the closed corridors of the high-rise building in which I stay in Mumbai during the height of the COVID lockdown. I've always been troubled by the thought that we, the educated liberals, for lack of a better phrase, spend a disproportionate amount of our time critiquing the state of the nation. The focus of our conversations are predominantly on India's failure as a socio-economic polity, the erosion of its institutions of governance, the poor quality of leadership, corruption, and bureaucratic status, and in general, the failure of our country to realize its potential. We seldom dwell on what has gone right, on the many examples of interventions by governments, business, civil society organizations, and individuals that have made a positive difference to society. In short, we seldom dwell on what has succeeded. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that these critiques are without substance. India has indeed failed to deliver on the promises made by its founding fathers to build a just, egalitarian, and sustainable society. India is still home to the largest number of poor people in the world, and it remains divided by class, caste, religion, language, and race. So said, this critique is, I believe, imbalanced. It ignores the achievements that over the past 75 years have, in some small way, shifted the needle of social progress in a positive direction. Anyway, my thought as I circumambulated this corridor in my high-rise building was that this balance should be corrected. That an effort should be made to shift the narrative from what has not been done to what has been achieved. And through this shift, input the positive learnings from these achievements into our future development models. I will admit to a personal influence. I come from Udaipur, a city that has been at the forefront of volunteerism and civic service. There are probably more civic social organizations or NGOs in this city than other comparably sized cities in North India. And many members of my family have been engaged in civic and grassroots activity. I have not been directly engaged. My career was along a very different track. But their involvement did give me an insight into the positive impact that grassroots interventions have made on society. It is this insight and the conviction that there were many individuals and organizations across the length and breadth of our country that have contributed comparably, and that their stories should be told, that I wrote up a proposal for a book for HarperCollins. My proposal encapsulated 4 objectives. 1, to get the progenitors of successful grassroots interventions over the past 75 years to narrate their stories. 2, to ensure that through this narration, the readers derive an understanding of how and why these organizations achieved success. 3, to distill the common principles and learnings, if indeed a unifying connect could be established, from these stories for possible inclusion into future developmental models. And finally, to shift the tenor of the public narrative from the negativism of failure to the positivism of success. HarperCollins accepted my proposal, but urged that the project be brought to completion by the start of our 75th year of independence. As I have no hands-on experience of grassroots activity, I invited 2 experts, Neelima Khetan and Jayapadma to help me with the project. The book, Anchoring Change, 75 years of grassroots intervention that made a difference, edited by the three of us, contains 24 different stories of grassroots interventions and one synthesis chapter that pulls together the connecting themes and common learnings. The selection of these 24 stories was not easy for our research, for our research had identified close to 100 interventions that made a difference. 24 barely touches the richness of these variegated efforts. We managed by deciding that the coverage should be expansive in time, that is across several decades, pan-India, multi-topical, it should cover all subjects such as women's empowerment, water, education, poverty alleviation, and so forth, and it should be inclusive of less well-known entities. Some well-known and much written about organizations were deliberately excluded. We sought the advice of a group of external experts like Vijay. Now, a read through the 24 chapters throws up one message, unsurprisingly. There is no silver bullet response to the complexity of India's social challenge. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to the myriad of problems that needs to be addressed. Each issue has to be tackled through tailored, localized responses. There is a unifying thread that binds these varied interventions across geography and time. This thread has several strands. All authors are driven by the conviction that they are addressing what one referred to as the salient problems of our time. They all recognize that success hinges on giving the poor a voice and an equal stake in the process and outcome of social change. The poor are not passive agents, and interventions have to be designed around them. The authors do not differentiate between means and ends. The two are inseparable. For them, the how of an intervention is as important as the what of the outcome. The challenge has been to prevent a wedge being driven between the two. Leadership is another unifying theme. In this context, what is striking is the preponderance of women in influential positions and behind successful social transformations. Partnerships and the support of the government are also cross-cutting factors of importance. Few civil organizations succeed without forging strategic alliances. And, not surprisingly, unsupportive bureaucrats and politicians or an unfavorable policy environment does present an existential challenge. Funds are, of course, a necessity, but civil organizations must be cautious about the quality of the funds. These organizations should look for money from donors that empower and encourage, and not from those that place conditions and create distortions. The strength of conviction to say no must be in every civil organization's quiver. Looking into the future, the stories hold out several lessons for development. The poor, the disadvantaged, the differently abled, whatever term you wish to use, can change their destiny if they are empowered to own the process of change and if they are supported by skill, technology, and resources. Civil organizations should see themselves as conduits and facilitators to create cultures of consultation and collaboration to develop and deliver holistic solutions for sustainable livelihood programs. Women are more effective than men in striking the right balance between the imperatives of change and the compulsions of tradition. A developmental model that does not give women a central place would be suboptimal. Individuals matter, and not just those vested with formal authority. Behind each successful intervention that we have talked about have been exceptional men and women who have, through sheer dint of intellectual vitality, physical effort, and urgent patience, moved the social needle. Such people need to be found, encouraged, and made integral to the process of development. This book does not refute the evidence that India has a long way to go to keep its tryst with destiny, but it shows that every segment of our society has at some time or other, and in some small way, across the length and breadth of the country, successfully addressed the issues of social inequality. It lays out the markers by which the citizens of India can bring political democracy into alignment with social democracy. In conclusion, and before I request the Hon'ble Dr. Karan Singh ji to make his remarks, I want to thank Swati Chopra, who is here, who is the editor of HarperCollins. I thank her for her constant support, editorial advice, and friendship. Every author, Swati, as you must know, needs a supportive publisher. And CSEP and we, the co-editors of this book, are fortunate in having had you steer us along. So thank you very much. So, may I request you, sir, to deliver your remarks.
Thank you, Vikram, for a beautiful encapsulation of the messages behind this book. Your speech itself, I think, contains a lot of wisdom, and it would be good if more and more people who hold power in public life were to listen to your speech carefully and try and absorb the basic points that you have made, particularly the one about the importance of women in the developmental process and the importance of a dialogue and dignity with the people to whom we are trying to help, not as a sort of a bhiksha, but as part of our social duty. Shri Vijay Mahajan, Naina ji, and friends in this nice little neat auditorium. I didn't know you had one here. What a joy it is to see a book for a change that talks about our successes and not our failures. There is too much doomerism. I don't know whether you've come across that phrase or not. I brought you an article called, a woman called Hannah Rishi, An End to Doomerism. Something you might be interested to read. Doomerism means that all the time, mar gaye, khatam ho gaye, ye ho gaya, tabah ho gaye, dekho kya ho raha. So, and doomerism, you know, these negative feelings often become self-fulfilling. When you keep saying that you failed, you failed, you failed, then all the zest goes out of the whole process. Young people particularly feel extremely frustrated. If you're all going to fail, then what's the use of their trying so hard? So it is really very nice to see this book, and I haven't read it, I must tell you, but I have glanced through it, and it shows clearly what a difference NGOs and individuals first and NGOs can make in the developmental process. We used to have at one stage, I remember very early on in our independence, there was this theory of working together and all, but it didn't, you know, it collapsed after a while, and it became again polarized, the whole developmental process. So, as he said, this one idea in his mind morphed into a book. And the book, by the way, I've seen all of you on television. You can't say this is a launch because I've seen you launch. I listened to you for 45 minutes this afternoon. How can this be a launch unless I have some psychic powers that can see things that don't exist? There was somebody, there were 3 people, the editors were there, and there was somebody, you may have seen it or not. Somebody sent me the link. They said, you're speaking this evening, why don't you see this? So I've seen it. Anyhow, so I know what you're going to say.
Sir.
It's virtual. Well, virtual say, but had to say.
We were waiting for you for the launch.
Well, good. Anyhow, so let me say, as Vikram has said, I have indeed witnessed the whole drama of Indian independence from day one. And I have met all the dramatis personae. Even Gandhiji. I must be one of the few persons alive who's actually met Gandhiji. Because he came to Srinagar in 1947 and he called on my father and my mother, and I was on a wheelchair, by the way. But I insisted on being there, so my wheelchair was wheeled up, and I didn't understand a word he said. He spoke in a soft Gujarati accent which I couldn't quite follow. But anyhow, the fact that I saw him is itself a big thing. And then, of course, all the prime ministers from Jawaharlal Nehru to Narendra Bhai Modi, and all the presidents from Dr. Rajendra Prasad to Srimati Draupadi Murmu. So I've seen it all. Because I'm older than I'm 92, by the way. And so I'm older than the Republic. I've seen the whole thing. And as you have said, there have been tremendous changes in these 75 years. It's impossible to encapsulate them, but very briefly, let me start with politics. We have had a functioning democracy for 75 years, which not very many countries have, with smooth transfers of power at the state and in the... We take this for granted, but there are many countries around the world who do not have this privilege. And an independent judiciary and free media, although there have been doubts about that from time to time, but nonetheless, by and large, we have had a functioning democracy with one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote. So that's, I think, one of the biggest achievements. The very fact that we continued our democracy without going into other aspects of it, I think is something of which we can be proud. On the economic front, I can broadly touch upon 3 revolutions which I have seen in my own lifetime, which really changed the picture of India. The first was the Green Revolution, with my good friend MS Swaminathan, Professor Randhawa. I mean, that Green Revolution, we literally, I don't know, you're much too young to remember, we lived from ship to mouth. In other words, the grain was coming in. If the grain came in, we ate. If we didn't, we starved, or millions starved. That was our position, Vikram. And today, we are actually exporting grain, which I think is a shame because there's so many people starving, but that's a different point. The fact of the matter is that Green Revolution changed everything. It transformed India's internal position and India's image in the world. We didn't have to go around with a begging bowl every time. That's one very important revolution. The second is the White Revolution of Korean. I think Amul, you talk of startups and NGOs. Amul is a miracle. What that one man did and achieved, the way he was able to set up this extraordinary cooperative of rural women. And milk today, we are the largest milk producers in the world, as you know. So that is another big revolution. People have forgotten it. You see, young people now take these revolutions for granted. But I remember when we did not have the revolution. We did not have the food. We did not have the milk. So I think they also need to be reminded that there has been a major change. And the third is what I could perhaps call the technological revolution. All the IITs, the space program. This was set up a long time ago. Homi Bhabha, a good friend of mine, Vikram Sarabhai. I mean, these are 2 people, Satish Dhawan, these are the people, the pioneers in the field of space travel and our program there. And so these 3 revolutions, the Green Revolution, the White Revolution, and the technological revolution, where of course now in technology, we've moved from, what did we have when I went to college and school? We had no computers. I mean, young people won't believe today that we could have got a perfectly good education without computers. But we did. You know, there's such thing in mental faculties also. Nowadays, you ask a young man to do a simple sum, they immediately run for their machine. They can't do anything in their heads. So I did my BA, I did my MA, I did my PhD, all without any computers, without any television. There was a time when there was no television. I'm sure none of you can believe that. How can you live without television? We did live without television. And you know, we did reasonably well, I think. So the point I'm making is that a lot of the things that we now take for granted were not there. And all of them required the sort of interventions that you mentioned here. But of course, with government help, not so much NGOs, but nonetheless, even with, I think the name I was looking for was community living, community something or another, development, that Jhabvala ji has set up. The idea was that it was not only government who would do it, the communities would get involved. Who are neighbors, that's a different matter. So that was the point. So this is this important point I want to make when we talk about change in political and economic and social revolution. Crores of people who were outside the pale, who were nowhere, nobody, they were not there, they were the non-people, the Adivasis, the Dalits, the backwards, they were brought into the mainstream. Why? Because of the one man, one vote. These people are now are being sort of lobbied by every political party. So the reservations for scheduled tribes and scheduled castes, I know some people are against that, but those reservations have changed the face of India. Because crores of people, literally crores of people, but they were not there. I mean, they were not in any कोई हिसाब में ही नहीं थे वो. And constitution giving every man a vote, equal citizens they are, and now they're being wooed by all the political parties. Dalit ko ye karna hai, tribal ka ye karna hai, because they need the vote. The only way to get a politician to move is if he gets a vote, let me tell you that, from personal experience. I was 40 years in parliament, mind you, Vikram, you know, 4 times in Lok Sabha and 4 times in Rajya Sabha. So I've seen it all, from the treasury benches, from the opposition in both houses. So, you know, it's a fascinating thing, but that can come later. So what I want to point out on our social, this revolution, the revolution of bringing outsiders into the mainstream, I think that is something which was very important. So the political revolution, the economic revolution, and the social revolution. I mean, these are all incomplete, mind you. I can go and I have a long talk about how, I have a talk called India's Unfinished Revolutions, where I mention these and what needs to be done, but I don't want to go into that today because I've been given only 15 minutes. So if I spend all my time on looking into those things, I won't be able to say anything else. Now, I must say that the critical role of civil society is very important. Or civic society, as you seem to call it. I don't know, I never heard that before. I always called it civil society. But I read somewhere in your book, civic society. I'm not sure which is the correct use. हम तो civil society कहते हैं भाई. Civic society must be your Mumbai sort of innovation or whatever it is. Civil society, the role of civil society in the anchoring is quite extraordinary. And it's fascinating, even for a layman like me, you know, I was not really in any way technologically inclined, nonetheless to read how some of these things have happened. And many of these things are areas in which we have ourselves been involved. For example, handicapped people. I myself have a locomotive handicap. I've lived with a nail in my hip for 75 years. But I've done fine. I played tennis doubles, I did badminton, I did golf. I have a disability. So there are very serious disabilities. They are audio, they are visual. Now, the world of disabilities is something which is totally neglected. It is estimated that 5% of Indians at least, if not 10%, have some kind of disability. So, unka kya hota? What happens? Who looks after them? So, some of these things are about people with disabilities, I noticed. And my late wife, whom you know, she started this school for special children in Delhi, which has been looking after children who are mentally handicapped. Now my daughter-in-law runs it. Another thing that we're doing is, my daughter, for example, is trying to re-establish Basoli paintings. You see, even the arts are not necessarily elitist. I mean, the artists are starving, most of them, are languishing, particularly in COVID. So they also have to be involved in some ways. In our cultural life, we have to involve the artists. So, as I said, these successes are very good, and I must congratulate all of those who have made a contribution in this. That having said, I must point out that we are a nation of great contradictions. I don't know whether any of you saw a wonderful article by Vikram Patel, in which it is not rocket science. What Indians need are basics like clean toilets, decent housing, drinking water, and nutritious food. Too bad our idea of modernization does not include them. And his article, I can't read it all. I'll read some of it. We are a country that can simultaneously boast of being home to medical facilities which are so sophisticated that people from other countries troop to them, while most of our primary care clinics don't have enough doctors, and we have amongst the worst health indicators in the world. We are a country which can be proud of producing more vaccines than any other, and yet be home to the largest number of unvaccinated children. We are a country which can boast of having so much food stored in our granaries that some of it is feasted upon by vermin, while tens of millions of our children go hungry and stunted. There's lots more. We are a country where we are pioneering the use of technology in every aspect of our daily life, even though most of our children do not have the digital devices or access to the internet, which they needed during the school closures in the pandemic, leading to a historic learning loss. We are a country that builds ultra-modern infrastructure on the banks of our holiest rivers, even while the waters themselves are slowly dying from the most toxic pollutions in the planet. Like this, it's a very interesting article. You should look at it. I like it if you like, loan it to you. So what he was saying was that there's contradictions, and he said, we are like this only. Is the only answer that people can give. We are like this only. So the point is that there are so many contradictions in this country still. Even today, crores of people shiver in the winter, drenched in the monsoon, sweat in the summer. They don't have any accommodation to live in. There are crores of children who go to bed hungry. I mean, what a tragedy it is. When we waste so much food on our weddings. If you go to a wedding, I don't know about Bombay, but Delhi weddings are gross. I mean, it's terrible to see the amount of food that is wasted when children are literally starving. And malnutrition, I've been health minister, among other things, and malnutrition is the worst possible thing because it stunts not only your body, but it stunts your mind. And it is a terrible deprivation. और भंडार तो हमारे भरे हुए हैं. जब हेड मिनिस्टर को पूछ हमारे भंडार भरे हुए. What is the use of भरो हुए भंडार if you can't feed your children? I've never been able to understand why we have not been able to get that food to the children. And somebody has to tell me this. I mean, I've been 75 years in public life. इसका तो मुझे जवाब कोई मिला नहीं. Perhaps you could think up something and let me know. Not that I have anything to do with it now, but it is be good to know that there is a solution. Because why should this be? नैना जी बताइए आप. भूख से बच्चे मर रहे हैं, उनको दो वक्त भोजन नहीं मिलता है और हमारे भंडार भरे पड़े, चूहे खा रहे. जितने मोटे चूहे हमारे देश में थे, मोटे चूहे कहीं नहीं होंगे. खूब अच्छे हृष्ट पुष्ट चूहे हैं हमारे, और बच्चे बेचारे जो हैं वो तड़प रहे हैं. ये क्या, what is this? Very bad. It's very bad for India. I'm sorry. I mean, with all our great achievements, we are going beyond the moon and we're going to Mars and we're doing also wonderful things. I agree. But why are our children undernourished? Nobody has been able to answer that question yet. So, Vikram, I don't want to take too much time, but the fact is that you have in your article synthesis towards a framework for grassroots intervention, you have summed up the challenges very well. And particularly your framework for future development, public-private collaboration is very important. The government, you have to bring the government into the picture. It's no use saying that, no, they are not corrupt, they may be, but without government support at some stage, you cannot really solve the problems that we have. So good, bad or indifferent, and we hope they get better, not get worse. The governments at the state level, more particularly at the state level, Because that's where the grassroots come in, the state level, the district level, the panchayat level, the block level. That is where government interventions are so important. So that is something which we have to do. I must congratulate you for this very good publication, Vikram, I must say. I'm not just saying because he talked of Udaipur. I've known his grandfather, Mohan Singh Mehta. He was the one who started a lot of these institutions in Udaipur, which are still functioning so well. So I've known him for many years. I'm not saying just because you're a friend, but because I really think that you've done a good job in this, and I'm sure the panelists will shed a lot of light on the. And maybe you come out with more books like this. May the force be with you.
Maybe request you, sir, to just formally inform the world that
Now
we
that
are
you want
launching
to
it
do it
formally. It is your. Thank you very much. Thank you for gracing this occasion, for honoring us. I'm going to now turn to Vijay. Your area, you are the door. And we've made a lot of, we've taken so much advice from you. The book owes much to you and the support you've given us. But you're obviously not going to be held responsible for the contents. You might have some comments to make about the contents and especially some of the conclusions that we've drawn. So may I just ask you to perhaps give us your thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you, Vikram. And thank you, Dr. Karan Singh, for such a grand overview of, it's really, when one thinks about it, to be sitting next to someone who was, born before the independence, who met Gandhi ji, and who's done all the things that you mentioned, that itself is quite a privilege. First of all, congratulations, Vikram, for doing the opposite of doomerism. It's a national disease, I think, that I think we have two national diseases. One is we are all deaf. We don't like to listen to others. And the other is that we are suffering from doomerism, and this is despite the fact that so much progress. Dr. Karan Singh alluded to 3 revolutions and many half-finished ones. And by the way, the half-finished ones are not something to laugh at. For example, though I am painfully aware of the health statistics, including the NFHS 5 data, which has come out recently, since I am also a policy wonk. But in 1947, our life expectancy was 32. National average was 32. Now it is 68. Just think about it. 36 additional years of life for every human being who's alive today, and that's 1.4 billion. And it's, by the time they are completely gone, the life expectancy may be 75 or more. So it's probably 40 billion additional life years contributed. What would be the valuation of an enterprise which would add that? I asked this question to my sort of financial sector friends. 40 billion life years additional. So there's a lot to celebrate, to be grateful for. And I think if there's a third thing which you've avoided, which I again want to applaud, is finger pointing. NGOs saying sarkar nahi karti, sarkar saying NGOs nahi karte hain, both saying market wale jo hain, business, they are the culprits. All the 3 sort of important components of a society, institutions of the state, institutions of the market, and institutions of civil society, are constantly sort of finger pointing at each other rather than collaborating for the national task. And in some ways, when you allude to public-private partnership in your future solutions, we move towards that. But before I come to that, let me just sort of, since it is a formal book launch, and I was involved, as you said, thank you for acknowledging that, with the some of the ideas here and some of the selections. The first thought, I was not aware of the name till the book came. The first thought that occurred to me, and I want to ask the editor maybe later, as to why did you choose this paradox? Because change and anchoring is quite the opposite of each other, and obviously it's not a slip, So
I can answer that. But
yes,
next
yeah.
one.
So I thought about it, and in some ways, while it's an apparent paradox, I guess, a change which is fleeting, which is not, it doesn't take root. We see that all the time, and it actually drowns more sort of hopes and scotches more expectations than it arouses, So you do need change which is stable and sustainable and hopefully scalable. And that can happen only if it is rooted, or anchored. So in that sense,
Well,
I
thank
think,
you for answering the question.
right. So I did try to think about,
No, you did, and
neither Vikram Mehta nor HarperCollins would sort of let a paradox pass so quickly. By the way, I do know Vikram's philosopher brother and his civil society brother, so I kind of know the family, and of course, one also briefly met Mohan Singh ji, and of course your father. So the choices of and I have to take credit for the fact that I did push Neelima, and I think she then convinced Vikram that we need to have at least a few case studies of government programs, which, according to me, are absolutely world-class, and which pass all the tests of good social engineering, sustainable, and they're far more scalable at a much larger scale than the even the biggest NGOs. And I'm so glad that you've included cases here on Kutum Shri, on Andhra Pradesh SERP, Society for Eradication of Rural Poverty, the Chhattisgarh Mitanin program, and so forth, and of course the Tamil Nadu midday meal program. So that's one good thing. However, I had another suggestion which I think even Neelima didn't quite agree with, so it probably never even made it to you, which was that I think that the change that has happened in India is also happened significantly because of people who are often seen as uncivil, or at least they're seen as the protesters, the activists, in some cases extremists. Let me give you three examples that I deeply admire. One is Shankar Gohan Yogi, who used to work in the Dalli Rajara mines which feed the Bhilai steel plant. This is in Bastar, a little north of Bastar, it's in Chhattisgarh. Shankar Gohan Yogi moved there in the late 60s, and he basically established a trade union of the tribal workers who were contract laborers. They were digging up iron ore and loading it in wagons and so forth. Most of the work that time was manual. Over a period of time, he managed to achieve a lot of benefits for them, and but also in the process alienated a lot of the contractors. And eventually, he was shot, and he died. It was there was a case lodged against a local industrialist who was eventually acquitted, so one doesn't really know what is the truth. But the fact is that a person who did so much for so many was taken away. But thanks to the Shankar Gohan Yogi's work, I think the rights of contract labor in that generation at least was significantly, they moved a whole step. Unfortunately, we are now seeing the reverse of it. There's been serious informalization and casualization of Indian labor in the last 2 decades. And we don't have a Shankar Goan Yogi amongst us. The trade union movement in India is almost dead. And it's as a result causing a lot of the opposite of welfare to millions of people. The extreme example of which we saw when so many of them had to walk back home in the midst of COVID, and that was partly because all those workers were basically from the unorganized sector. The second such person I can mention is Mehta, very well known for her Narmada Bachao Andolan. And while we can argue both ways about the desirability of a dam on the Narmada, because I also worked in places like Saurashtra, and I know what that water has done for those places, both in terms of drinking water as well as irrigation. But at the same time, I also know what it has done to the tribals in Omkareshwar and other places. And Mehta's question was, the current situation where all the costs are to be borne by the tribals and all the benefits shall flow to people who get water downstream is not fair. Of course, this sort of congealed into an opposition of the dam, but eventually what happened was that the R&R, the relief and rehabilitation packages that eventually started getting more widely accepted and then went beyond dams to any kind of projects, and it was ultimately codified in the Land Acquisition Act of 2013, were significantly a step towards social justice. The half-finished revolution that Dr. Karan Singh talked about, which was envisaged only in the preamble of the Constitution, and the rest of the Constitution, though a great document, is seriously short of instruments to achieve any of those 4 goals: justice, liberty, equality, or fraternity. Fraternity was bilkul missing hai. There is not a word in the Constitution after the preamble to build anything about fraternity, and that's why we are where we are. At least for liberty, we have the fundamental rights and the courts. For equality, there are again Article 14, 15, etc. For justice, of course, there's the whole judicial system. But, as an engineer, even though every time I read the preamble of the Constitution, there's a catch in my throat, but as an engineer, I say, hey, partner, sorry, after such ideals, where are the instruments to actually implement them? The Constitution, sadly, after the preamble, breaks down into being the memorandum of association of the Indian state. After using "we the people" as the first 3 words of the preamble, the people are basically been reduced to the subjects of the state. In your preface, you talk about citizenship and democracy. The idea of India was based on citizens building the new India. The Constitution of India, almost every clause begins with the state shall, the state shall, the state shall. Read the directive principles, every one of them, from Article 39 onwards, right up to the 51 that was introduced by Indira Ji. All begin with the phrase, the state shall, as if there's nothing in India other than the state.
Except the fundamental duty.
Yes, sir. Which was Article 51.
I was on the drafting committee.
Right, which doesn't begin with this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in some ways, civil society, and by the way, though the common usage is civil society, but I prefer your usage, because unfortunately in the last 10 years, that phrase civil society is being misused as civil societies. that is societies registered under the Societies Registration Act, which is a trivial category of the original, abstract noun called civil society. And in any case, I think civic represents citizenship in the active sense rather than civil, which is a kind of a, inherited adjective, So, I prefer that usage. And I thought in fact, I would do it advisedly in future. So, so the summary of these 24 or 24 less the ones which are government efforts is that they were efforts by citizens, individuals, some acting alone initially and some acting in groups, to come together and work towards the idea of India which was envisaged by our founders, but which was, the state was either not willing or able to do it, and the institutions of the market in any case did not see it as their business till fairly recently. Okay, and I'm not referring to the CSR business, I'm talking about the whole business thinking about its role in society. So first and foremost, these are stories of citizen action to address the ills and deficits of our times, and to do it in an organized way. And the seed of it is always an idea. If you read the chapter on the Tamil Nadu midday meals, of course, it started as far back as 1920 in the Madras Corporation. But when Kamaraj made it a statewide program in 1956, he inaugurated it in the village of Subramaniam Bharati, the poet. And the article says that one of the reasons was that Subramaniam Bharati had written, I only know the translation, English translation, where there's this one line saying, if even one man goes hungry at night, let this world be destroyed. When it's said in Tamil, it's really powerful. And that idea really became, you might say, the moral legitimacy for building the Tamil Nadu midday meal program, which, by the way, was an attempt to address malnutrition and things that you mentioned. And it, unfortunately, unlike the Methanian article, the Tamil Nadu article does not use much data or statistics to show actually what is an absolute world-class, long-term, successful program. So if it's ever revised, I would advise them to put some data, because it's really something we can be proud of. But from the seed of the idea, whether it's a poet's line or whether it is, some idea in a manifesto of a political party, you still need, you need a place where that idea is tried out in practice, so that real people can see how it plays out in practice. And the role of civil society organizations is they are those nursery beds of innovation which make ideals sprout and take root. And you can see that, oh, this plant will yield this kind of fruit. And if I have many such plants, I'll have a whole garden full of such fruit. But to then expect that NGO, that civil society organization, to then go and cover the whole earth with that is unfair, because they neither have the resources nor the legitimacy, nor the, the sort of role in the eyes of society to do that everywhere. And that's where the role of the state and in some case market institutions comes in. And as society is transiting from being able to figure out how to meet essential human needs in ways that are sustainable, that is where there's no charity involved and no subsidy involved, but it's a user pay for services. One simple example of which is, says, healthcare. At one time, it was supposed to be completely a service, free service, right? But slowly, an increasing proportion of the population started affording it. Even now, we are at a situation where a significant part of the population cannot afford it. But through innovations like health insurance, even in the last 10 years, for example, we've seen a dramatic rise in the number of people without means being able to afford advanced medical or surgical care well beyond their means because of the pooling effect. So as society is able to come up with these innovations to address human needs, it's quite valid to transfer these out of the world of civil society to institutions of the market. So I therefore do not think that there's anything wrong with for-profit health, as long as it's regulated and it's available, made available to a larger number of citizens. And for that, there are other techniques, as Naina, being from the financial sector, would sort of agree with me that health insurance is a great enabler to spread the possibilities of health. And whether it's a US-style model or a single-payer model, those are further matters of detail that this is not the appropriate place to discuss. I want to therefore say that this triple finger pointing that has been happening in society needs to stop, and we need to get together on the same table and say, hey, these are critical problems of our time. Whether it is rampant malnutrition that Dr. Karan Singh referred to, or a number of other things that we lament in our drawing rooms every evening, we need to recognize them as national problems that everybody has to get together to solve. And we need to then put together institutions of the state, institutions of the market, and civil society institutions to work on them together. And to this triad, Vikram, I want to add two more, which don't actually fall in this triple category. And these two are knowledge institutions, which are, though universities can be sarkari or private, but they are not really institutions of the market or institutions of the state. And knowledge institutions, in my mind, include the media, because they are basically, using information and to sort of disseminate it more widely. So universities and the media. But the fifth is financial institutions. And that's because though financial institutions can be both either state-owned or market players, but they are a class in themselves because they deal with a particular type of capital, which has become so important, both as a problem and as a solution, that unless we bring that in our toolbox for change, we are denying ourselves one of the most important instruments that the 20th century discovered to bring about large-scale change. So technology, coming largely from knowledge institutions, institutional practice from that triad of institutions that I talked about, and capital. These three have to be deployed to resolve to address our problems of our time. And therefore, what I would have liked to see in this book, other than those few of those activist stories. By the way, the third one I forgot to mention is, of course, Aruna Roy and her work. So those are my three favorite examples of activism who have made a huge change to society. But I think the deployment of knowledge, technology being an instrumental knowledge, institutions, because individual action is trivial, and capital together, and doing this without finger pointing, doing this with the spirit of let's crack these problems. I think that's the way to go. And I think this book fills us with hope, because in small ways it's been done. Basics, when I started it, little commercial here, in the first year we did 2 crores worth of lending This was 1996. And we were, at that time, the only commercial microfinance institution, and therefore, obviously, the country's biggest, 2 crores. That was 1996. In 2022, 31st March 22, year ending, total microfinance in the country was 2,76,000 crores. And in a smaller version of Dr. Karan Singh's life, I have seen every bit of that happen in front of my eyes. From people telling me, तुम पागल हो, गरीब आदमी को लोन दोगे बैंक से लेके और वो तुमको वापस करेगा और तुम बैंक को वापस करोगे, मजाक है, to where today it is considered one of the best asset classes for any bank. All banks are vying with each other to be in microfinance. And the whole ecosystem for it is built, including warts and all. But it has got built, and it's happened in front of my eyes, and it's been done by real people whom I know. So I'm very hopeful, the opposite of doomerism, that like that we can crack 100 problems. The 3 that Dr. Kurian, that he mentioned, about Dr. Karan Singh mentioned, about Dr. Kurian's White Revolution, Dr. Swaminathan's Green Revolution, and the technological revolution, which is many, many people, a subset of which is the digital revolution, you know, which we've seen. Being an IIT engineer myself, I sort of, from the time fabricating a diode in 1975 for a BTech project, I can't believe that in my pocket right now I was carrying a pen drive, which was 128 gigabytes, you know. So if it had to be installed in the IIT Delhi today, using the same type of computers that were there, we'd have to have a campus bigger than IIT Delhi for 120 gigabytes. So all this has happened. What I'm saying is this has happened by real people, by the same set of institutions whom we malign every day, and under the same semi-functional, imperfect democracy and imperfect set of institutions. So can we please shut up and start focusing on solving these problems rather than focusing on doomerism? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that's profound, and thank you. And so much to talk about, but I could ask so many questions, but I do really think that, Naina, your comments on not necessarily the book, but this idea of change that we have talked about, the toolbox that Vijay has talked about, the challenges that Dr. Karan Singh has talked about. If you brought them together, given your own effort to solve one set of problems in the sanitation, I just wondered if you could share your thoughts.
I can't resist one footnote. I'm very fond of acronyms, and since you mentioned the toolbox, it is actually a KIT. K for capital, I for institutions, and T for technology.
All right.
All right.
As my friend Arjun would.
Yeah, okay, good.
I can't think except in acronyms.
Naina,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Vikram.
The only one.
With acronyms.
Oh, I have bad company, sir.
Yeah. So, lots of thought for reflection here, and I must thank you, Vikram, for having me here, because in every such forum, it gives one a chance to reflect and think and actually feel good about where we are as well. Dr. Karan Singh ji, just hearing you as ever, and to point out, as you have so aptly, the article on doomerism, I love the term, and to actually look beyond that, I think, is actually what this book does. So a big congratulations to you, Vikram, to CSEP, for taking forward what I think we do very little of, which is to celebrate our successes, to celebrate the individuals who've made a difference. I love the title, Anchoring Change. It is about change, and how that perpetual change is so important for us to see. So I would just like to reflect on the thoughts that have been going through my mind, hearing all the great speeches we've just heard, on what then anchors change. And Vikram reflects on it, I know, in his opening introduction as well. And one of them has to be how we deal with failure. You know, this is a sector, when you work as NGOs, there's just so many challenges coming at you all the time. You don't always succeed. Vijay himself was reminding me about the journey in microfinance, and I have known him and worked with him when I was at HSBC as we were trying to institutionalize microfinance in the bank, barely understanding it, with bosses who were like, you know, you guys are mad. How on earth do you think you're going to be funding microfinance institutions in India? But we got our way. And people like Vijay showed us the way. And Vijay was reminding me about the crisis, which was actually a political crisis in Andhra. So that's a clear case where there's a failure of institutions that brings on issues where that same impoverished, typically groups of women, the self-help groups which anchored microfinance, were willing and able to pay, and those disciplines are what carried the microfinance movement forward, were destroyed by one fell swoop of political activism, which came in to say, please don't pay back. And for all those loans that were going fine, and there was this huge growth of the sector, it collapsed. Just one movement starting in Andhra and then spread to 3 southern states where microfinance was booming. So you get these huge setbacks, and how do you deal with this failure? How does a basics come back into being a major microfinance institution? How do you not lose heart is also very, very critical. So I think dealing with failure when you work in any business, frankly, I talk about this to my business colleagues and some of the leadership lessons that I take back to people. But in this sector, it has to count for everything. And I think that refrain you will see through some of the stories that are shared. And I think very, very importantly so. I think a second area is collaboration. And much has been said rightly of the collaboration and role of government and the not-for-profit, the NGO sector. But I would also like to add a third dimension there, and that is the corporate. I'm really happy to see the e-Chopal experience here, Vikram. It hasn't been mentioned, but the ITC e-Chopal is a great example. It's in the book for you to read. And what they achieve in terms of community activity, some of it's self-serving, and I think that needs to be there. It's self-serving in that they work with farmer communities who they're also dependent on or have been dependent on for tobacco. But they've gone way beyond that. And the example I'd like to take is in the field of sanitation, which is where I work. And my late husband and I started the India Sanitation Coalition. ITC right now, working in that space, has really shown what working in communities in sanitation is about. And we have a very interesting project going on now which highlights the role of the corporate. And I think it's such a big tick mark in the country that the same ministry who I've worked with very closely over the last 6 years since we started the India Sanitation Coalition, which by the way predates the Swachh Bharat mission. We just lucked out that suddenly it became such a big program. So government was our partner, had to be a partner. I was dreading that part of my work only to find that that partnership was very rich and very engaging and the least of the challenges that we faced. In fact, we were having to push back government in that we weren't always able to do what they wanted us to do. Welcome change, and also shows how sometimes when change is driven from the top, it can really help down the line. But coming back to the corporate in the sector, in the last 3 months, we have had the Ministry of Rural Development and the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation reach out to us to create lighthouse projects. And 75, because it's 75 years, but anyway, that aside, that the reason for it is, hey, we have given a lot of money down to the states to implement sanitation. It's come through the Finance Commission. It's not just there in the budgets of the ministry. It's right down at the state level. But the money is not being deployed fast enough. We need not the money of the corporate, but the partnership of the corporate to ensure that the money is spent and spent well. Imagine government is reaching out, saying, we want to make sure that this money is used in a way that the partnership between the corporate, the state government institutions, which can be the panchayat, it's the mission directors, I mean, they go under various categories at the grassroots. And of course, the third is civil society, because we do have a lot of NGOs that work in this space. And I mean, I don't think we would get anywhere without them, that partnership is established. So the role of the corporate now is in the program, typically around the factories where they work. So as a corporate, it's self-serving, good. It's self-serving because, and therefore I come back to the Chopal example, it's self-serving because around your factory, you want to make sure the communities are healthy and well, because you draw from those communities. If the woman who's coming to work in your factory is sick, or her family is sick, her attendance is going to be an issue for you. So you want that community to be healthy. You want to make sure that community has water, because if they don't have enough water, they would believe you are drawing the water, and there's going to be conflict. So you want to make sure that they have the right sanitation, the right nutrition, and the right levels of water, education, because it benefits you. So you go into that activity as a corporate to provide for the programs that government provides. You make sure they know what programs government should be providing, so you help them access it. And by the way, digital is really helping in that space, the knowledge of what programs are there, and for the individual to draw from it, but also to make sure that the implementation is good. And where there are gaps, you step in to finance it as a corporate. So the best partnerships and the projects that I believe have succeeded best are those where this collaboration has worked. The collaboration of government, the NGO, and the corporate. And I'll say corporate, but it's corporate and donor. I mean, sometimes it's UN bodies, sometimes it's donors. It's often less about the finance and much more about the implementation of programs and access to programs, which I think are very, very important. So as we go forward in looking at some of these examples, I think I would really like to see examples of where each vertical is not just narrow in the space it looks like. You'll see some of these examples work in communities across different platforms. They aren't just there saying we're educating children. They will work as, you see ones like ANT, they work in various streams to ensure welfare of the communities where they work. So it's very lateral, it's horizontal, it spreads across the community instead of in narrow brackets. Others focus on a bracket, that's fine, but when you focus on that, you also want to see the lateral engagement. And what I mean by that, and Dr. Karan Singh ji, you talked about nutrition. Sanitation and nutrition go hand in hand. We have the highest number, declining fortunately, of stunted children anywhere in the world. A stunted kid is a kid that doesn't grow to his or her full capacity, mental as well. It impacts the development of the brain, it impacts the development of the body, and what you end up is, forget demographic dividend, if you have half developed human beings, this is not going to be a demographic dividend, it's a liability. And if you have diarrhea, which comes from poor water and poor sanitation, you can feed as much good food to that individual, but it's literally going down the drain. So the combination has to be about nutrition, development, sanitation, water, which is such a key aspect, clean water, drinking water. I mean, there is no end to the challenges at every level of society, but bringing it together to solve for nutrition isn't just about getting good food to the person. It is about ensuring that everything from health, which Vijay mentioned, through to nutrition, sanitation, water, etc. gets solved. And education is key to it all, that unless you know what it means, why are you washing your hands, why is it important? And COVID was such a help. And fortunately, Swachh Bharat had started this whole practice of washing hands. Kids had been part of wash programs, education on cleanliness, hygiene, thanks to Swachh Bharat. But by the time COVID came, that institution of washing was already embedded. Now, never mind that we still have issues on how do you give water and soap and whatever, to the individual. But it's solving for all these that become key. So I think what the best examples you will see in this book are those that have managed to work across lateral spaces. The e-Chopal is an example of that. It starts with farmers and the e-Chopal, which was really about helping them access information to do with farming. And today, one of the biggest programs in this Lighthouse project that I just explained to you, where we have corporates now who've adopted districts and are working down at the rural areas in sanitation and water. One of the biggest partners is ITC, who were already doing 60% of the work. There was another 40 that they needed to just dot the I's and T's to bring the whole thing together in a meaningful way. And I think we will see more examples of this. Now, finance, very, very critical. There are microfinance institutions mentioned here, so that is one aspect. We need far more institutional finance. Microfinance is only one. It's green bonds when it comes to environment. There's a very interesting project right now coming from a corporate in the area of carbon credits. And it's interesting because we all live in our great Delhi and its polluted airs of November. This corporate, which is UPL, has a fungicide. It's India's biggest agribusiness company, and it's one of the biggest in the world. Has a fungicide which in 3 weeks can destroy the stubble which our farmers burn. So rather than burning, you apply this fungicide. By the way, it's already been implemented in a number of districts in the north. And I think in the next 3 years, the good news is we have a solution. It's distributed free to the farmers because it's funded by carbon credits.
You see, it had been implemented.
It's implemented. It's implemented, but not widely enough. Oh no, it's a Pusa. It's been on television also the last 2 years. All the good news is all the politicians are taking credit for it. AAP's calling it their program, BJP's calling it theirs. It's all great because it should be everyone's program. And what this implementation is about is farmers resist change, as you well know. So the first few that have gone ahead have gone with their hearts in their mouth. But when they see that it works, it produces great fertilizer, the answers are there. But my point here is carbon credit, which is a relatively new finance concept, is enabling the delivery of this fungicide for free to farmers. So innovations in finance are going to be very important to bring some of these solutions into our marketplace. And they are for-profit solutions. The company makes money from distributing fungicide. The farmer makes money by having excellent, cheap fertilizer, which is what he creates by applying fungicide to his stubble instead of burning it. And his next crops are proven to be richer and better as a result. So it's a win-win across the board. And I think these are the collaborations we need as we go forward. And the most successful examples, I think, demonstrate that. I would, so failure, dealing with failure, collaboration and how that works across the different players, the most successful ones being the ones that work together. And working across verticals, so one isn't narrow. I say I work in sanitation, but can I ignore water? Can I ignore nutrition? Can I ignore education and the way it is taught in a school? No. You have to work through the different threads so that when you apply sanitation and water, it's a horizontal. It cuts across verticals. Whether if you're working with women, you need to have toilets so that they can have ready access to it because it's a matter of their dignity and their safety. If you work in education, you cannot ignore teaching sanitation and water, so on and so forth. So the verticals that you think you are looking at have to also have these horizontal applications and vice versa. And we have to always think about, when we solve for one problem, to make sure it doesn't create another. Does an electric vehicle solve for the environment if the electricity you're using is coming from coal? We have to solve across and make sure that we aren't looking at just, yes, it will solve for pollution, but does it solve for everything else? How do we have holistic solutions and work in parallel? And it's great to see that you do have one of the great players actually in the solar area as well in the book here. So I will just end by saying that we need more such documentation of examples that work. I am delighted to see how these have endured, that these are not organizations that lost courage, lost faith, and then moved away. They have been around for a long time, and may they live for many, many more time. They will reinvent themselves, they will go up and down, but they are there now. They are past that, I'd like to believe. The whole area of scaling up remains a big challenge. If there's one challenge in the not-for-profit sector, it's scale. And I think that it's distressing actually to see how little sharing happens in the sector. They tend to be very individual-oriented around an individual. The inability of that individual to build teams and scale is something, I mean, I see wearing my corporate hat. It is a challenge. You want the passion of that individual, but you also want them to be able to create that passion in a million others who work with them, but also enable replication. So at our India Sanitation Coalition, we keep tabling examples of what is working so they can be replicated. And you would be amazed how difficult it is. It's like extracting teeth sometimes to get people to share what is working for them so that others can replicate it. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. Yes, local examples change, but replication and books like this help because they will inspire others, they will show others the way, and for those that want to share what they do, go back and do that. I'll just end by saying I'm really sorry that Renana Ben couldn't be with us. I have worked very closely, my husband even more so, my late husband, with Seva and the work that they do, and particularly given Ila Ben's passing, it would have been wonderful to have had her here with us today. And it's a remarkable example of what can be achieved on scale and how women have led this organization, Seva, the whole creation, whether through microfinance, livelihood creation. And I can tell you that at the behest of Ila Ben, my husband actually worked on setting up Grassroots Trading Network for them, which was a Seva organization, which was about working with corporates. Seva learned how to do organic farming because ITC taught them. Seva learned how to work with the ammas who go selling product in the local villages because of levers, and how to actually make products which sell in the market through Fab India. These corporate engagements took a business, and they were businesses for Seva, which were under 1 crore to tens of crores. And I think, again, it needed someone like Ila Ben, always NGOs suspicious of corporates, to get her organization into a mindset where they saw partnerships rather than suspicion and looking at everyone out there as an enemy rather than a friend. And I think the more we see of those examples, the more we will see scale and success as we go forward. So on that note, back to you, Vikram.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naina. And yeah, I'm sorry, Renana was unwell. So she couldn't join us. We have about a minute or so, and I would like to actually pass the request Dr. Karan Singh ji to have the last substantive word I might say a few thank yous after that, but
All I can say is that what the panelists have said makes a great deal of sense and gives a very clear direction as to how we should proceed in this matter. All the points that you made, the collaborations, the horizontal linkages, and the building of teams rather than individuals are all tremendously important. And I'm grateful to Vijay Mahajan and to Naina ji for giving us these insights, which are very valuable. And in a way, they all come back to your book. And each one of them have been very complimentary about the book, rightly so, because we can learn a lot from this book. We can learn how these individuals and NGOs have made a difference. We can also think as to how they can expand. Ultimately, as you say, scale is important. And scale cannot just be by pushing money in, it has to be on a collaborative basis. And I was, in fact, astounded to learn that this midday meal program began as an NGO program in Tamil Nadu. I didn't know that.
It started in the Municipal Corporation of Chennai.
Yes. More or less sort of semi. It wasn't a sort of ministry program, it was a thing. And how this can grow is an example of how a good idea, if it takes off, can really make a difference. So I think this has been a very valuable discussion, Vikram. And I hope that you and your editors find it of interest, so that when your next book comes out, you will be able to carry on this dialogue to the next level. Thank you.
well, let me just say once again, thank you very much, sir, for being here. It's an honor. It's been a privilege. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Naina. As Dr. Karan Singh ji said, the conversations, the insights that you have all brought to the table, enrich the book, enrich whatever it is that we try to do, the three editors along with the authors. And they certainly give us possibly an opportunity to think about a follow-up project, but that's for the future. It would be remiss for me not to thank the 24 authors formally. Only Vijay is present here today, the others are not. But clearly, a book, these compliments that we have received are compliments that are directed towards the authors. And wherever they are, I hope they're listening in virtually. But I would like them to know that I'm most grateful to them. They met all the deadlines that allowed the three editors to meet the deadline that Swati and her team had imposed on us. The book did get published a week before India celebrated its 75th anniversary of independence. So my grateful thanks to the authors. We did get support from corporate India, Axis Bank, and Bajaj supported us, and I'm really grateful to them too. And then finally, of course, my gratitude to my colleagues. Shishir is here, the CEO. Our president, Rakesh Mohan, has a commitment in Bombay, so he couldn't be here. But there are many of you in this room who have helped me and my two co-editors. So thank you all very much. This is what CSEP is all about. We are, in a way, endeavoring through our research, which is independent, totally non-partisan, based on empirical data, and seeking to impact the direction of change in this policy. So books like this, or papers that all of you contribute to, that's the purpose of CSEP, the Center for Social and Economic Progress, and I really am grateful to all of you for being my colleagues. So, sir, thank you again very, very much, and thank you all.
90 minutes exactly.
I did promise you, promise your secretary, I'm not sure who we promised, but someone, that we would not delay you.
No, I'm not really.